Please note the exits in this hall. 1 at either side of the stage and 2 at the back. In case of emergency, you will be ushered to safety. We ask you to please make sure that mobile phones and all other electronic devices are firmly switched off. Photography, filming, or recording are not permitted during the commemoration. In the interest of security, please place any bags under your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, due to the solemnity of the evening, we would ask you not to applaud during any part of the ceremony. Tea will be served afterwards. Thank you. This evening's Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration is being live-streamed. Some of the readings have been pre-recorded. Some footage has been used from previous years. Our youth readers this evening are all winners of the Mary Elms Prize in Holocaust Studies. Every year, on this evening of commemoration, we solemnly mark Holocaust Memorial Day here in Dublin. We remember 6 million Jewish people murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. And we remember millions of other persecuted minorities who were victims of Nazi atrocities. This evening's ceremony provides us with the opportunity to cherish the memory of those who perished and to reflect on the consequences of the Holocaust. I invite the Lord Mayor of Dublin, Dáithí de Roiste, to welcome you.
Cordia is more an honour agus an privilege dumsa our son winter Maliachli of vet live ag an ócáid special the show of Vincer Show Gachblin. On behalf of the city and the people of Dublin, it's a great honour for me to host this important national event which takes place in Dublin every year. We feel privileged to be here amongst the survivors of the Holocaust and the descendants of survivors who've made Dublin and Ireland their home. And we welcome representatives of all the victim groups who live amongst us here in Ireland. Holocaust Memorial Day marks the date of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau on the 27th of January 1945. Tonight, we recall the suffering inflicted on the Jewish people of Europe and those of other faiths and ethnicities who were persecuted during the Holocaust. We reflect on this and on the suffering still being inflicted on people throughout the world today. We acknowledge the work of Holocaust Education Ireland in its endeavours to educate and inform about the Holocaust and ensure that it is never denied or distorted, but always remembered.
I invite President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, to address us.
Ahalsha Odwere Balya Clear, Ari Yokti Doyle, Akohorehe, Machentori, an Iloska Susie Diamond, Agus Tommy Reckenthal, Agus Anita Elia Dietson, a Wariok, Sin Iloloska. A Guinea Cole. I welcome this opportunity to be present with you all here today as we mark National Holocaust Memorial Day. And may I thank Professor Thomas O'Dowd, Chairperson of Holocaust Education Ireland, for the invitation and congratulate them on their work. And may I take the opportunity again to offer every good wish to Chief Rabbi Yoni Vida on his recent installation as Chief Rabbi of Ireland. We are also honoured yet again on this Holocaust Memorial Day 2024 to have Holocaust survivors Susie Diamond and Tommy Reckentall with us, and representatives, relatives of those who were victims. For the personal recollections of survivors of the Holocaust, deeply painful as they are and must be for those who make them, are so important, are such a constituent part of a powerful giving of witness, an invaluable authenticity as context to any words any of us may use, reminding us, as they do, of the millions of individual lives which together make up the collective experience of the Shoah. Families murdered, families torn from each other, deaths suffered, sometimes witnessed, and so many others in solitary conditions. Ensuring that we recall this period ethically, with the fullest context, nothing hidden from before or after, that all the victims are remembered, is of the utmost importance. Today is an opportunity we must take to continue the painful task of breaking the many silences that still exist in relation to the Holocaust, however painful as that may be. As Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel stated in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech in 1986, "I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." So today is a day in which we reflect on that monument to hatred that the Holocaust constitutes. We are challenged to engage with the moral challenge of asking what it teaches us, what it has taught us, not to shirk the task of recognizing how hatred of the other is generated, sustained intergenerationally, tolerated, made possible by the apathy of those who should have cared. And we must recognize how such indifference, delivered into our own times, can have the greatest of consequences. On Holocaust Memorial Day, it is now 79 years since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, with our knowledge that the Nazis and the Allies who supported them ran over 44,000 camps, ghettos, and other sites of detention, persecution, forced labor, murder during the Holocaust. It is a time to remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust, together with the millions more murdered under the deadly attrition of Nazi persecution. On National Holocaust Memorial Day, it is appropriate too to recall the bravery, generosity of spirit of those who have spoken and written of this time, the tenacity and great will to survive of which they wrote, all of which are a central part of the Holocaust story which today we are sharing internationally with others. It is a privileged opportunity, then, that we all have to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. It is a day for everyone to recall a terrible darkness, but also for us to seek the security of light, and to respond to the reality of a shared but diverse humanity that was rejected and defiled, a day to remember all those millions of people murdered in their name of being different because of some characteristic intrinsic to their being, something that was an essential part of their identity, be it their ethnicity, faith, or sexual orientation. Such a recall as we make has a relevance for our present circumstances. We live in a world that is going through a period of rising political authoritarianism, polarization, and violence. It is an atmosphere that threatens a shared existence, democracy, and is one that promotes racism, division, and exclusion. We must remember that the Holocaust, while an event of unique horror, had preceding preparatory circumstances based on a falsity of myth, ignorance, extreme versions of nationhood of peoples, while it developed incrementally and indeed with some disgraceful intellectual as well as political support, in a society that gradually accepted laws which removed rights from particular minorities, and in doing so, by giving not only tacit but overt support to such changes. That is why only the fullest recuperation of all of the facts of the period before and after, the period that succeeded, will suffice. Together with the Jewish community, Roma and Sinti communities, homosexuals, political prisoners, the physically and intellectually disabled, and anyone else considered a threat to the racism myth and policy of the regime, by holding such characteristics of difference, were also imprisoned, tortured, and murdered. As we come together today to remember the victims of the Holocaust, it is important that we recognize the very significant trauma of recent events following the appalling atrocities which took place on the 7th of October, perpetuated by Hamas. The violence of that action, the killing, abuse, and abduction of hostages from their families, of other young people attending a music festival, was a horrific and morally reprehensible act. But if we believe that life itself is what is paramount, that all lives matter, then we must acknowledge, too, that since the 7th of October, too many lives, and particularly those of women and children, have been lost, that over 500,000 people are, as I speak, at the edge of famine. In order for 2024 to see the beginning of the process of recovery from all those who have been so devastated by the events of recent months, including those who have lost their lives in Israel and Gaza, it is incumbent on all nations to redouble their efforts for an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and to commence the task of achieving such a lasting and meaningful peace as can provide security for Israel, while at the same time realizing the rights of the Palestinian people. When wars and conflicts become accepted or presented as seemingly unending, humanity is the loser. War is not the natural condition of humanity. Cooperation is, and we must recover and assert this principle at every level, nationally, regionally, and internationally, and in our families. We must take steps to challenge hatred and persecution in whatever forms they manifest themselves. And we can do this by promoting a world that is free from persecutions based on people's differences and diversity, such as faith or ethnicity, thus making possible a world that is free too from war and conflict. Holocaust Memorial Day brings us together from many different backgrounds, an occasion that promotes the essential empathy that constitutes a shared humanity. It stresses the importance of learning from the past and the taking of the necessary actions for a more peaceful future. As anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, racism, homophobia, and intolerance are once again on the rise in parts of Europe and many parts of the world, we must, as we remember the Holocaust collectively, ensure the lesson is imposed on the world that such cruelty and hate, of the regarding of others as lesser, inferior in rights or participation, are heard and understood. The Holocaust was enabled by a regime of systematic murder that began by the manipulation of language and belief and the spreading of fear. We in our times must be alert to the identification and confrontation of hate speech in any of its many guises. We must work together to ensure that hatred and anti-migrant feeling, for example, are not allowed to deepen their shadow across Europe and the world. In the delivery of a moral content to our lives, we are all migrants in time. I believe that it is vital, as new generations emerge and their world ostensibly becomes further removed in measured time from the horrific event that is the Holocaust, that they are made acutely aware of the consequences of complicit actions of silence, of the averted gaze, of those who by their culpable indifference allowed the Holocaust to occur, all of those who participated in it, who facilitated it. We must ensure that every generation understands the horrors of the Holocaust and what it teaches us about the nadir of basic morality to which humanity can sink and could sink again. Such a move requires us to confront the horror of this period, but we must never forget the deeper challenge of asking, how did it come to be? How did a process of dehumanization be so effective and with such little resistance? What indifference, beyond any manipulation of ignorance and hatred, allowed it to become the terminus of horror that we are commemorating today? Many around the world remember the Holocaust atrocities in different ways. In recent times, as part of the Crocus Project, Sabine and I planted yellow crocus bulbs in the grounds of Áras an Uachtaráin. We were joined by a group of children to remember the 1.5 million Jewish children who suffered and perished in the Holocaust, and the thousands of other children who were victims of Nazi atrocities. Let us continue to plant the alternative seeds that may yield a more peaceful coexistence on this our shared vulnerable planet. May we achieve such an empowering, inclusive, ethical remembrance as not only reminds us of the nadir to which the Holocaust and the preceding hatreds brought humanity, but one that in our times renders us alert to the rise of xenophobia and the rhetoric of hatred. Let our concept of ethical remembrance be one that allows recovery, renewal of the recognition of our shared human vulnerabilities and possibilities, féidearthachtaí, one that continues to uphold an obligation on us all to plant the seeds of an emancipatory future into the poisoned soil of a bitter past. Bergach Banacht, agus guim siacan dún iliach, don tau chi.
I invite Professor Thomas O'Dowd, Chairperson of Holocaust Education Ireland, to introduce this evening of remembrance.
The Holocaust has a diaspora that reaches far beyond the infamous sites where it occurred. In fact, thousands of survivors and their descendants live in many different countries around the world, a handful of whom came to Ireland. While they began life in Ireland as immigrants, through time and generational change, they have become Irish. Jews have played a full part in all aspects of Irish society. Through education, we refute Holocaust distortion and denial by providing historically accurate information about the Holocaust and its consequences. We aim to challenge anti-Semitism and all forms of racism and discrimination, encouraging acceptance and respect for all people, fostering a diverse, inclusive, and equal society. With few Holocaust survivors left to carry the burden of memory, the lessons of history grow dangerously dim. It becomes even more important to educate generations now living. We urge young people in our midst to speak out against the scourge of disinformation, prejudice, and hatred, so that they learn the lessons from the past that are relevant to their lives today.
The Stockholm Declaration 2000, of which Ireland is a signatory, is an international intergovernmental agreement between countries, committing them to commemorate and educate about the Holocaust. Roderick O'Gorman, Minister for Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, will read an extract from this important document.
We, the governments attending the Stockholm International Forum on the Holocaust, recognise that it was a tragically defining episode of the 20th century, a crisis for Europe and a universal catastrophe. The unprecedented character of the Holocaust fundamentally challenged the foundations of civilization. After more than half a century, it remains an event close enough in time that survivors can still bear witness to the horrors that engulfed the Jewish people. The terrible suffering of millions of Jews and other victims of the Nazis has left an indelible stain across Europe that must forever be seared in our collective memory. The selfless sacrifices of those who defied the Nazis and sometimes gave their own lives to protect or rescue Holocaust victims must also be inscribed in our hearts. We pledge to strengthen our efforts to promote education, remembrance and research about the Holocaust in our schools, universities, communities and other institutions. With humanity still scarred by anti-Semitism, genocide, ethnic cleansing, racism, xenophobia, and other expressions of hatred, we commit to fight against these evils and to reaffirm our common aspiration for a democratic and tolerant society free of prejudice and other forms of bigotry.
I invite Pascal Donoghue, Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, to tell us about the challenges of hatred that we face today.
The devastation of the Holocaust left 2/3 of the Jewish people of Europe murdered and rendered their culture and their history on the brink of oblivion. This left behind the momentous task of rebuilding Jewish life on European soil. Thankfully, this same endeavour has been possible in the decades since the Holocaust in a more united Europe. Gradually, reconciliation replaced mistrust, and states began a process of necessary critical self-examination, acknowledging the role that they and their citizens played in the Holocaust. This process, as much as the improving economic and social conditions, allowed the restoration of the confidence of European Jews. However, while many European states have made great strides in this process of critical self-examination, violence, discrimination, and prejudice against Jewish people has yet to be eradicated. Anti-Semitism is a particularly virulent form of racism. It can be communicated through a vast array of means, whether through attacks on Jewish people, their synagogues, schools or businesses, or casual remarks in a workplace, anti-Semitic chants at a football match, or the representation of Jewish people through media. The virulency and versatility of anti-Semitism across Europe has been further fueled by the rise of right-wing and white supremacist movements around the world. Social media has been, in some ways, a perfect accelerant for this process, allowing the fermentation, the dissemination of hate speech and cruelty, where extremist rhetoric can develop unchecked and unheeded. The ease with which a social media thread can be shared perpetuates the language of hate with ease but more concerningly, works to normalise language that can then seep into the national discourse. Ideas which once languished in a Facebook group or an obscure tweet can become mainstream and consequently viewed as acceptable. So, recalling the tragedy of the Holocaust in the last century necessitates addressing the challenges we face in the present century. Declarations and acts of anti-Semitism were hateful and wrong then and remain so today. Each of us have a responsibility to remember what happened, but so do we each have a responsibility to call out such declarations and acts for what they are, whenever and wherever they are manifested.
A handful of Jewish Holocaust survivors live in Ireland. All of them were children during the time of the Holocaust, and all of them found their way to Ireland by different means. Each of them lost many family members in the Shoah, and each has his or her own personal tale of survival. Tommy Reichenthal, who came to Ireland in 1959, for 50 years, he didn't speak about his experiences during the Holocaust. I invite Tommy to share his story with us.
I'm here today not because of what I am, but because of who I am. I'm a Jew, and I'm a survivor of the Holocaust. I was born in Slovakia in 1935. I was just 9 years old when I was captured by the Nazis along with my mother, brother, grandmother, aunt, and cousin. We were herded into a cattle cart, and from that moment onwards, we were treated worse than animal. There was no privacy or hygiene. The stench and the condition were unbearable. Eventually, after 7 nights, the cattle train stopped. The doors were open and we were greeted by shouts from the SS with gun pointing and barking dogs. We had arrived at our destination, Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. I was there from November 1944 until the liberation of the camp in April 1945. What I witnessed as a 9-year-old boy is impossible to describe. The starvation, the cruelty, the cruelty of the camp guards, the cold and disease, people who were just skin and bone and looked like living skeletons were walking around very slowly, some of them dropping to the ground, never to get up again. They were dying in their hundreds, their emaciated bodies left where they fell or thrown onto heaps. In front of our barracks, there were piles of decomposing corpses. From many prisoners in Bergen-Belsen, the conditions were too much to bear, and they threw themselves on the barbed wire at night to be shot in order to put an end to their misery. We found the bodies, the corpses, there in the morning. 70,000 prisoners of Bergen-Belsen are buried there in mass grave. I lost 35 members of my family in the Holocaust.
The boycotts of Jewish businesses and professions in April and May 1933 were soon followed by book burnings and discrimination against Jewish artists throughout Germany. Gradually, Jewish people were squeezed out of German society. I invite Fintan O'Toole, Irish Times columnist and author, to give his reading.
The Nazis put up posters in the windows of Jewish-owned businesses and professions, warning German citizens to defend themselves and not to patronize them. Jewish religious books, books about Jews, and books by Jewish authors were burned in public bonfires, along with other books by writers who the Nazis condemned as un-German. Book burnings took place throughout Germany, where some of the finest works of literature, history, philosophy, science, and art were all destroyed. This was intended to leave Jews and Germans bereft of learning about their culture, their history, and their heritage. Art created by Jewish artists was condemned as degenerate. Their paintings and artworks were ripped from public exhibitions and private homes, much of it destroyed. Jewish artists were ridiculed and beaten in public, and works of art owned by Jewish people were stolen by the Nazis. Jewish actors, film directors, and artists were no longer able to find work, and Jewish composers and musicians were dismissed. Very soon, Jews were not allowed in public places such as cafes, the opera, cinemas, theatres, swimming pools, ice rinks, bookshops, or barbers. They could no longer sit on park benches which had "Not for Jews" stenciled on them. Jewish people were not allowed to ride on trams. There were Nazi police everywhere, preventing Jews from going wherever they had always been able to go.
The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 had profound impact for German Jews. I invite barrister Deirdre Nivlin to tell us about them.
The Nuremberg Laws were designed to make Jewish people disappear from German society. Jews were deprived of their German citizenship. Jewish people were prohibited from marrying or having relationships with non-Jewish Germans. This law was soon extended to include Roma, Black people, and other ethnic minorities. For the first time, Jews were defined as a race. As restrictions tightened, Jews found it increasingly difficult to earn a living. They were no longer able to work in the civil service, in academia, or the media. Jewish businesses were appropriated by the Nazi state, and Jewish banks and bank accounts held by Jews were confiscated. The Nuremberg Laws disenfranchised Jews and deprived them of their civil rights and their human rights. Jewish people were desperate to leave Germany.
By July 1938, as pressure increased on Jews to leave Germany and German-occupied lands, hundreds of thousands tried to flee. Anticipating a Jewish refugee crisis, President Roosevelt convened an international conference in Evian, France, to discuss offering refuge to Jewish people. I invite Evelyn Byrne, National Lead on Civic Engagement, to give her reading.
"32 countries were represented at the Evian conference. They included Ireland. Delegates were asked if they would accept Jewish refugees. Most countries said they had no room for Jews, or that their quotas were already full. One country even stated that no Jew is too many. With nowhere to turn, Jews found themselves trapped within their own borders. Today, people are still fleeing discrimination, persecution, tyranny, and war, desperate to find refuge, to find somewhere safe. These challenges are impacting on our world and our country.
The state-sanctioned violence of the November pogrom in 1938 marked a turning point in Nazi persecution of Jewish people. Kim Bielenberg, whose maternal grandfather, Fritz Dietloff von der Schulenberg, participated in the plot to assassinate Hitler 80 years ago, in July 1944, will tell us about the November pogrom.
The November pogrom, known as Kristallnacht, erupted across Germany and Austria as the SS, Nazi police, Hitler Youth, and locals rampaged through the streets on that November night. Hundreds of synagogues, Jewish schools, and businesses were destroyed and set ablaze. Windows were smashed, leaving the streets strewn with glass. 91 Jews were beaten to death and hundreds died later of their injuries. Some 30,000 Jewish men were thrown into concentration camps. Jewish cemeteries were desecrated and thousands of apartments and shops belonging to Jewish people were looted. After the destruction, the Jewish communities were fined 1 billion Reichsmarks to pay for the damage. After years of official harassment of Jews in Nazi Germany, the state-sanctioned violence of Kristallnacht marked the acceleration of Jewish persecution that would ultimately culminate in the Holocaust.
I invite Jill Pitcher-Farrell, Chief Scout of Ireland, to tell us about the rules of identification imposed on Jewish people by the Nazis. Youth reader Kishailin Reddy will read from the diary of 15-year-old Yitzhak from Vilna.
The Nazis forced Jewish people to wear identifying marks such as yellow stars of David to be worn as badges on their outer clothing, or white armbands with blue stars on them. Everyone in Germany was required to carry identity papers, but special identifying marks were added to those of Jewish people. A large red letter J was stamped on their passports, and the middle names of Sarah for females and Israel for males were introduced. All of these measures enabled the Nazi police to easily identify Jews.
The decree was issued that the Vilna Jewish population must put on badges front and back. I was ashamed to appear in them on the street, not because it would be noticed that I'm a Jew, but because I was ashamed of what they were doing to us. I was ashamed of our helplessness.
More than 1,000 ghettos were created throughout Nazi-occupied Europe, usually in rundown areas of cities or large towns, from where thousands would be deported to concentration camps, labor camps, killing sites, or death camps. I invite Dermot Lacey of Dublin City Council to give his reading. Youth reader Jennifer Blakeney will read from the diary of 13-year-old Eva from Romania.
Jews, Roma, communists, homosexuals, and political opponents of the regime were incarcerated in the Nazi ghettos, which were created in every country occupied by Germany. It is estimated that 1 million people died in them. Many ghettos were walled in or fenced off, and residents who left them without permission were severely punished, often shot. The brutality, harsh living conditions, starvation rations, and disease added to the death toll. It suited the Nazis if they could claim that people in the ghettos were dying from natural causes. The inhabitants of the ghettos, who came from all walks of life, soon realized that the ghettos served as a place to destroy them physically or psychologically. and their ultimate fate would be death. Although there are heroic stories of resistance, most of them failed. In the end, all of the ghettos created by the Nazis were razed and the populations murdered. There were few survivors.
We are here 5 days, but it seems like 5 years. First, the fence was finished and nobody can go out or come in. And on every house, they've posted a notice which tells exactly what we are allowed to do. Actually, everything is forbidden. But the most awful thing is that the punishment for everything is death. It doesn't actually say that this punishment also applies to children, but I think it does apply to us too.
I invite Patrick J. Houlihan, Assistant Professor of History at Trinity College, Dublin, to tell us about the Nazi camps and killing squads.
There were hundreds of concentration camps, labor camps, and transit camps within the Nazi camp system. They were run by the SS, and many also had several sub-camps. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners succumbed to brutality, starvation, cold, and disease in these places of incarceration. In June 1941, Germany swept into the Eastern Territories and Russia. The German army was followed by special killing units called Einsatzgruppen, tasked with killing Jews in all the towns and villages they passed through. The killing squads were made up of Nazis, SS, police officers, members of the German army, and hundreds of local collaborators. They rounded up Jews in shtetl towns and villages, forcing them into cemeteries, forests, and ravines, where they were murdered in their thousands at point-blank range. Many were forced to dig mass graves before being shot into them. Entire Jewish communities, totaling some 1.5 million Jews, as well as thousands of other victims, were annihilated in this method of face-to-face killing.
Word reached Berlin that some members of the killing squads found their work distressing. They asked head office to find a more efficient way of murdering Jews. And so the Wannsee Conference was convened on the 20th of January 1942. I invite Jonathan Claridge, Deputy Head of the European Commission Representation in Ireland, to tell us about the meeting.
Reinhard Heydrich, Chief of the Reich Security Main Office, summoned 15 delegates to a meeting in the lakeside villa at Wannsee, outside Berlin. He asked them to endorse Hitler's plans for the total annihilation of the Jewish people of Europe. Eichmann presented the delegates with a list of the number of Jews living in each European countries who the Nazis intended to murder. Ireland appears on the list with a total of 4,000 Jews. The inclusion of Ireland on the Wannsee list has huge significance for the Irish Jewish community. Had the war taken a different course and the Nazis not been defeated? The delegates debated who was Jewish according to bloodline considerations and discussed evacuation and resettlement, euphemisms for murder. They concluded that a more efficient method of killing was possible, one that would produce little residue and spare those operating the killing sites the negative psychological trauma of face-to-face killing. In less than 2 hours, the delegates gave their unanimous support for the implementation of the final solution to the Jewish question, the establishment of death camps in which Jewish people and other victims would be murdered by poison gas.
I invite Stephen Benedict of the National Film School to tell us about the Nazi death camps. Emily O'Reilly will read from the memoir of Kitty Hart-Moxon from Poland, who was 16 years old when she was imprisoned in Auschwitz-Birkenau. She still speaks about her experience.
Six death camps were created by the Nazis, all of them on Polish soil, where approximately 3 million Jewish people and thousands of other victims were murdered in gas chambers. Prisoners were selected for life or death. 90% were selected to die. They were ushered into undressing areas where they were told to leave their clothes neatly on the numbered pegs and to tie their shoes together to make them easier to find when they came back from the showers. They never came back. Their clothing, shoes, and personal belongings were sorted and sold in markets back in Germany. Human hair was used in the manufacture of textiles. This systematic industrial process of murder was unprecedented in human history.
As evening came, the whole sky was red. Smoke and flames were pouring out of all the chimneys. None of us slept that night. It was no longer possible to pretend, even to yourself, that the stories were not really true at all. All that we had heard and guessed was now before our eyes. Here were the death factories. Today, in 2024, it is barely credible for someone like myself, who lived through the worst of it, that members of a younger generation cannot believe that it happened at all. But I did live through it, and I do know it happened. I was there.
The Holocaust was unprecedented in its planning, execution, and in its intent to destroy the Jewish people, their culture, and their history. Leonard Abrahamson, President of the Jewish Representative Council of Ireland, will give his reading.
The final solution was the systematic intent by the Nazis and their collaborators to murder every Jew in every country of Europe, stretching as far north as Norway, as far south as Rhodes, as far east as Russia, and as far west as Ireland. They also included those Jews living in the countries of North Africa and Arab lands. 6 million Jews perished in the Holocaust. 1.5 million of these were children. The Nazis also murdered millions of other victims, but as Elie Wiesel reminds us, it is true that not all victims were Jews, but all Jews were victims.
We will now hear a Roma song called The Burning Barn. This song was created by a group of Polish Roma who were captured in a town by the Nazis. The Roma could not speak to each other, but they knew other Roma were heading towards the town with their families. They created this song to warn them of the fate that awaited them if they entered the town, and then sang it repeatedly as a warning. This song saved Roma lives. I invite Monika Paszkowska, a member of the Polish Roma community, to sing this poignant song.
Widziałem motyla, jak w górę się wbił, miał skrzydła zranione, sączyła się z nich krew. Chciał walczyć, lecz nie mógł, bo brakło mu sił. Ten promyk słoneczny w górę się wbił. Ach, dali doli romale, oj so peskierył, bo furu już nadur i dodać on. Assyria me preskiras, och Syria me daras, assos que tu me traden, pezamari ben Jan. Ach, dali doli romałe, oj so peskierył, bo furu już nadur i dodać on, bo furu już nadur i dodać on.
We must prevent future generations from thinking of the Holocaust in terms of anonymous, faceless numbers. Every victim has a name. There are people living in Ireland who lost cherished family members in the Holocaust, whose names we have included in the scroll of names. For some of them, we know their place of birth, their country of origin, their age, and their place of death. For others, we have only their names, and these are included in the scroll. In this small way, we honor their memory and give them a personal Irish memorial. I invite pupils from Stratford College, Dublin, Maynooth Community College, Kildare, Presentation Secondary School, Warrenmount, Dublin, and Loretto College, Foxrock, to read from the scroll of names.
Max Heller, Clara Heller, Gisela Molnar, Sander Molnar, Bayal Hirschberg, Matthias Hirschberg, Ruchla Orzel, Freivel Orzel, Slasma Urbach, Hirsch Urbach, Tauba Urbach, David Yosef Urbach, Shaul Urbach, Ab Tzvi Urbach, Gilta Freila Urbach, Leah Fegla Urbach, Nachum Mordechai
Sarah
Urbach,
Gil
Ruchla
Urbach,
Golda Urbach,
Simon Urbach, Nuchim Urbach, Fegla Urbach, Perla Urbach, Fermetta Urbach, Moses Klein, Hilda Frankel, Kurt Frankel, Walter Frankel, Herbert Frankel, Fritz Frankel, Zygmunt Frankel, Salomon Del Monte, Roman Paszkowski,
Helena Paszkowska,
Kalina Paszkowska,
Karolina
Urbach,
Paszkowska, Leokadia Paszkowska, Lucjan Paszkowski, Józef Paszkowski, Tadeusz Paszkowski, Caroline Wolf, Martin Wolf, Wolfgang Wolf, Sally Wolf, Henrietta Wolf, Rosetta Wolf, Ellie Velvel Avizanski, David Philip, Rekha Philip, Leopold Philip, Julia Philip, Dagbert
Valeria
Philip, Louis Philip from
Rosilia
Minsk.
Shaimovich, Julius Meyer, Geza Surim, Oscar Shaimovich, Adalea Fried, Bella Fried, Katrina Fried, Agnes Fried, Ezekiel Reichenthal, Katrina Reichenthal, Kamar Reichenthal, Ilona Reichenthal, Gitta Reichenthal, Ibi Reichenthal, Decider
Alt,
Reichenthal,
Erna
Ferdinand
Albert,
Alt,
Marta Albert, Joseph Drexler, Bedriska Drexler, Paul Drexler, Meta Drexler, Bella Perlberg, Irma Popper, Yura Mattia, Ifisha Mattia, Ankisha Mattia, Colin Rosenthal, Eleonora Rosenthal, Abraham Sustio, Paulin Sustio,
Shaman Sustio,
David Sustio,
Regina Sustio, Rape Sustio, Marcia Sustio, Shabote Sustio, Lucy Sustio, Moshe Yom Tov Sustio, Adela Sustio, Agni Stostil Brudo, Emmanuel Brudo, Sostil children, Heinrich Heinbach, Selma Heinbach, Simcha Zaks, Rivka Zaks, Beryl Zaks, Cece Zaks, Nachman Zaks, Chana Zaks,
Joel
Aaron
Dobbs
Zaks.
Zaks, Bendit Zaks, Leah Zadok, Gatel Zaks, Shoshana Zaks, Shina Zaks, Masha Zaks, Rosa Zaks, Tyler Fig Fackler, David Mayer Fackler, Moshi Fackler, Joyla Fackler, Shane Del Malekman, Yahil Malekman, Theo Malekman, Joseph Malekman, Pepe Gorzik.
Malekman, Hi Maya Malekman, Nusen Newt Fackler, Esther Zeg Jakubovic, Mem Alt Malekman, Levi Falcher, Falke, Izzy Falke, Nathan Falke, Johanna Karlsberg Sommer, Emil Sommer, A.T. Steinberg, A.T. Steinberg, Leon Kleck, Wojciech Kleck, Hatko Abram, Bela Abram, Osea Joseph Abram, Sigmund Leslie Kahn,
Ellie Zimak, Jenny Zimak, Abraham Homburg, Emma Homburg, Gerda Feist, Fanny Kaufman, Adolf Homburg, Raphael German, Karl German, David German, Hannah Matla Zibner, Rivka Zibner, Baby Zibner, Minzla Zibner, Zulim Zibner, Franzla Zibner,
Joseph Zibner, Mendel Kuzner, Shana Bela Kuzner, Ovsei Kuzner, Shana Riva Kuzner, Shifra Kuzner, Rash Kuzner, Yankel Kuzner, Wanda Camarino, Renato Decori, Italo Camarino, Giulio Decori, Miriam Naftulovichova, Morik Moisa Zizek Naftulovich, Mayer Naftulovich, Sidonia Naftulovichova, Hani Naftulovichova,
Morik Moskovich, Isidor Moskovich, Shimshon Hertz, Kayla Hertz, Shandell Hertz, Abraham Hertz, Roisa Hertz, Joseph Hertz, Lev Hertz, Maya Roshovsky, Rachel Roshovsky, Kayla Roshovsky,
Max Kaktov, Mikila Kaktov, Sioma Kaktov, Dvora Krasnik, Miriam Krasnik, Henna Krasnik, Vega Krasnik, Annie Ottenwolf, David Galassan, Janet Galassan, Paul Talma, Sarah Talma, Isaac Zisi, Ephraim Sachs, Lena Jean Sachs.
Liberation was not always joyful for the survivors of the Holocaust, especially Jewish survivors who had lost everything, their families and their homes. Most had no one left and nowhere to go. Sarah Scannell of St. Catherine's National School will read from the memoir of Primo Levi. Youth reader Ciara Morton will read from the diary of 12-year-old Chava.
So for us, even the hour of liberty rang out grave and muffled and filled our souls with joy and yet also with pain. Nothing could ever happen good and pure enough to rub out our past. The scars of the outrage would remain with us forever, in the memories of those who saw it, in the places where it occurred, and in the stories that we shall tell of it.
We had been liberated. I was no longer only a number doomed to die in a Nazi gas chamber, a prisoner without the right to life. Germany had been defeated. Once again, I was an ordinary girl. True, I was different from other girls my age, very different in many ways, but I was free.
I invite Dermot Rafter to tell us about resistance during the Holocaust.
People often ask, how come Jewish people didn't rebel or resist their Nazi oppressors? Of course they resisted. There were insurrections, revolts, and rebellions in most of the ghettos, concentration camps, and even in the death camps. All of them failed. Throughout the war, there were heroic acts of resistance by individuals, groups, and nations. Armed resistance was undertaken by non-Jewish and Jewish partisan groups, such as the Bielski brothers operating in Belarusia, who protected and saved some 1,200 Jews. The partisans fought the Nazis from the forest and the peripheral areas of occupied lands. There was spiritual resistance, where Jews risked their lives to maintain their religious observance in the ghettos and the camps. And there were clandestine movements, such as the White Rose Group, led by the students Sophie and Hans Scholl, who were ultimately arrested and executed in 1943. In spring 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising erupted and lasted 27 days, involving 700 young residents, poorly equipped and lacking military experience. 7,000 Jews died in the fighting, and some 40,000 were deported to the death camps. The ghetto was razed, and the Germans reported to Berlin that the former Jewish quarter in Warsaw was no more. In March 1943, the people of Bulgaria refused to hand over their Jewish communities to the Nazis, although they did not save some 11,000 Jews from the territories of Macedonia and Thrace. And in September 1943, on hearing that the Jews of Denmark were about to be deported, the Danish people rescued their Jewish compatriots by forming a flotilla of every kind of seaworthy vessel to ferry them to safety in neutral Sweden.
I invite Dana Ehrlich, Ambassador of Israel, to tell us about the close connection between Israel and the Shoah.
After the Second World War, tens of thousands of Jewish Holocaust survivors who were gravely impacted by the Holocaust, the Shoah, like my own family was, made their way to their ancestral land in the recently established State of Israel. They were called She'erit HaPleta, the spared remnant. The survivors gradually rebuilt their lives and created a safe haven for new generations of their families in their ancient homeland. We hoped it was a safe haven. As President Isaac Herzog, of proud Irish descent, said, "The massacres of October 7th have brought memories of some of the darkest moments of history right into our present. The scope and horror of the atrocities are painfully familiar to our people, but the speed at which denial began to spread and Jewish suffering was dismissed exposed another painful truth. Anti-Semitism does not belong to some other time and place. It is right here. Today, as we commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day here in Dublin, we must redouble our efforts to combat anti-Semitism in all of its forms and ensure that never again means never again. Never again is now.
In 1963, Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Remembrance Authority in Israel, inaugurated the Award of Righteous Among the Nations to honor non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jewish people during the Holocaust. I invite Amina Mustafa from Sport Against Racism Ireland to tell us about these heroic people.
The righteous come from all walks of life and backgrounds. Individuals, groups of friends, families, whole villages, organizations, and diplomats. They were nations such as Denmark, Bulgaria, and Albania, and the bishops and the mayor of the Greek island of Zakynthos, who saved their Jewish communities. There were also righteous Germans, righteous Nazis, righteous Arabs, and righteous Muslims. Priests and nuns throughout occupied Europe risked their lives to provide false documents for Jews, as did diplomats such as Raoul Wallenberg and Sempo Sugihara and many others. Mary Elms is the first Irish person to be awarded the Righteous title. Working with her colleagues in the south of France, they succeeded in saving some 200 Jewish children from the Nazis. Not only those Jews who have been personally saved by the righteous owe them their lives, but all of their descendants do too.
I invite Karina Camarino to tell us about second and third generation Holocaust survivors.
There are thousands of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Holocaust survivors living in the world today, and several live in Ireland, and some of them are here with us this evening. We have grown up with the legacy of the Holocaust in our families. As a third-generation survivor, I sometimes think of how unlikely it is that I exist at all. All four of my grandparents are survivors of the Holocaust. My Romanian grandfather was a prisoner in a work camp until he escaped. My French grandmother was hidden in the countryside with her family and escaped arrest because the entire village conspired to protect them, warning them and hiding them behind a false wall built into a barn whenever soldiers were nearby. My Italian grandmother's family was tipped off by a police commissioner to be out of town on the day the SS rounded up the Jews of Rome on the 16th of October, 1943. My Italian grandfather's family was arrested that day and deported to Auschwitz. Of the 1,022 people who were rounded up on the 16th of October 1943, only 16 people survived. My grandfather, Enzo, was one of the survivors. After the war, he made it back to Italy and eventually to Canada, where he raised his family. He named his son Italo and his daughter Giulia after his own father and mother who were murdered in Auschwitz. All of my grandparents have died now, and I feel responsible to speak out about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. I can't forget that the danger of people harming other people hasn't gone away. This history is not that long ago. I'm raising my son, a fourth-generation Holocaust survivor, to be proud of his culture, his religion, and his family history. We exist because my grandparents survived. Jonathan Phillips will tell us about his father.
My father, Geoffrey Phillips, was born in 1925 in a small town in northern Germany. I remember him recounting the November pogrom known as Kristallnacht, which took place on the night of 9th of November 1938. He spoke about their local synagogue, where just 7 months previously he had celebrated his bar mitzvah, being set on fire and razed to the ground by squads of Hitler youth, and learning in the morning that the same thing was happening throughout the country. Soon after, there was a loud knock on the door. 2 plainclothes policemen instructed my grandfather to pack a change of clothes, and they took him away. Not long after, my grandmother learned that Britain was prepared to take in a limited number of Jewish children, and she hurriedly arranged to send Geoffrey, her only child, on a kinder transport. He never saw his parents again. He was just 13 and a half years old. Initially, Geoffrey kept in touch with his parents by limited communication via the Red Cross. But with the outbreak of war, the letters ceased. The last letter Geoffrey received ended with, "Look after yourself and Godspeed," which he took to be a coded message that his parents realized their destiny. And yesterday, the 27th of January, was the 80th anniversary of my grandfather's murder at the Stutthof death camp in northern Poland. After the war, Geoffrey remained in England, where he married and later came to Ireland in 1950 with his wife, my mother, Phyllis. They had 3 sons born here in Ireland, David, Jonathan, and Robert, and I am their middle son.
Kyla Hertz will tell us about her grandparents.
My father's father, Wolf Hertz, was 27 when he, his parents, and 4 siblings were rounded up in their home in Galicia, now western Ukraine. They were taken to the ghetto in the nearby city of Drohobych. From there, his parents, Joseph and Reza, and siblings Kyla, Scheindel, Rachel, and Shimshon were all taken to the nearby Bronica forest and shot into a mass grave. Wolf was the only member of his family to survive the killings, the forced labor, and the ghetto by escaping into the forest. On my mother's side, my great-grandmother Lenka was 17 when she and her family were deported from Slovakia to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Lenka and her sister Berta were the only 2 of their family to survive. Avram, her childhood friend and eventual husband, was also the only one in his family to survive. As a descendant of 3 Holocaust survivors and 33 victims, it is with an overwhelming sorrow that I often give my family silent moments, yet it is my highest honor to break that silence with a voice that can commemorate and educate.
Yoram Tokar will tell us about his great uncles and aunts in France.
After securing the agreement of the Vichy government, German officials and French police worked together, conducting roundups of Jews in both the occupied and unoccupied zones of France. As deportation increased, an infamous roundup took place in Paris on the 16th and 17th of July 1942. 12,884 Jewish men and women, including 4,051 children, were brought to the Vélodrome d'Hiver, an indoor stadium in Paris. The Jews were kept there for 5 miserable days under deplorable conditions, poor ventilations, little food, water, or sanitary facilities. Parisians nearby could hear the wailing of the internees days and night. Eventually, they were transferred to Drancy, where their children were separated from their parents, who were deported to Auschwitz. Many of their children stay for several weeks in Drancy, where a large number of them die of lack of care. Finally, they too were sent directly to Auschwitz, where most of them were gassed on arrival. Only 811 Jews survived the roundup of La Grande Rafle. My family was torn apart by La Rafle du Vélodrome d'Hiver. My grandmother's brother and sister, David and Janet, who were 21 and 19 years old, were visiting their uncle and aunt, Paul and Sarah Talma, in Paris. They were among the Jewish citizens rounded up during La Rafle. Great Uncle David died in Drancy transit camp. Paul and Sarah Talma, along with my grand-aunt Janet, were sent from Drancy to Auschwitz, where their lives ended up in the gas chamber in August 1942.
Nicola Zinn Collins will tell us about her father.
My father, Zoltan, and his sister, Edith, were both very young children when they were found in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp by Dr. Bob Collis, who brought them back to Ireland and reared them with his own family. Survivors of the Holocaust have very few relations. We have got used to having very small families, at least from one side. No grandparents, no uncles, no aunts, no cousins. We have been endowed with the title second or third generation, and this brings with it its own important responsibility to transmit the memory of the Holocaust to future generations. But we can also rejoice in our lives, in our own families, our children and our grandchildren. Hitler did not win. One or both of our parents or grandparents survived, and we are here, living our lives, looking towards the future.
Dr. Bob Collis worked as a volunteer doctor in the former Bergen-Belsen concentration camp immediately after the war. He brought 6 Jewish orphans back with him to Ireland. Among those children were brother and sister Terry and Susie Molnar, who Bob arranged to have adopted by a Jewish couple, Willie and Elsie Samuels. I invite Susie Diamond to tell us her story.
I was born Susie Molnar in the town of Karjak in Hungary in 1942. We were a small family comprising my mother Gazella, my father Sandor, my brother Terry, and myself. In 1942, my father was forcefully conscripted into the slave labor service of the Hungarian army and deported to the Soviet Union, where he perished in 1943. Between July and September 1944, in just 8 weeks, Adolf Eichmann organized the roundup and deportation of nearly 500,000 Hungarian Jews. They were sent directly to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where most of them perished in the gas chambers. During these weeks, the Gestapo came for my mother, brother, and me. We were deported first to Ravensbrück and then to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. My mother died shortly after liberation. Terry and I were very young children when we came to Ireland. We grew up believing we were the only 2 members of our family to have survived. In 2007, Terry passed away, and I was the only one left. But things changed in 2015 when I was discovered by a first cousin still living in Karjak, and I learned a little about my family. My father was one of 4 brothers who ran a timber business. 2 of them perished in the Holocaust, and 2 survived. I have also learned that I have first cousins living in Hungary and the United States. I have a family. I have visited Karjak and seen my grandfather's house, the Jewish cemetery where my grandparents are buried, and the synagogue where all my family prayed. 778 Jews lived in Karjak before the war. 461 of them were murdered in the Holocaust. Most important for me is the memorial scroll on the synagogue wall, recording the Jews from Karjak who perished in the Holocaust. My family is listed on the scroll, but this has to be corrected because my brother and I were not murdered. We survived. Today, I am mindful that time is passing too quickly for my contemporaries and for me. What we experienced took place in the middle of the last century, far too distant for young people today to understand the enormity of what happened. 6 million Jews murdered because of their faith, more than the population of Ireland. I urge young people to speak out about hate speech, about bullying, and about Holocaust denial. I implore them to tell our story and to keep the memory of the Holocaust alive.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for 1 minute's silence as we remember all of the victims of the Holocaust. Thank you. It is customary at Holocaust Memorial events to light 6 candles in memory of the 6 million Jewish people who perished in the Shoah. In Ireland, we also light candles in memory of all of the victims of the Holocaust. In memory of thousands of people with disabilities and disabling conditions who were murdered, forcibly sterilized, and starved to death by doctors and other willing helpers, I invite John Dolan and Gary Carney of Disability Federation of Ireland to light their candles. We will always remember. In memory of the genocide of the Roma, which took place during the Holocaust, when more than 250,000 Roma and Sinti people were rounded up, murdered, displaced, and forcibly sterilized by the Nazis, I invite Richard Simon and Melissa Orsan of the Roma community to light their candles. We will always remember. In memory of ethnic minorities, Poles and other Slavic peoples who were murdered, displaced, forcibly Aryanized, and incarcerated in concentration camps, I invite Ewa Milcharek from Łódź in Poland and Salome Mbugua of Akidwa, the national network of migrant women living in Ireland, to light their candles. We will always remember. In memory of the thousands of gay men and women who were imprisoned in concentration camps, where they were subjected to harder work, less food, and greater brutality than other inmates. Thousands were murdered. I invite Anna Nolan, chairperson of the National LGBT Federation, and Oisin O'Reilly, chief executive of Outhouse, to light their candles. We will always remember. In memory of the political victims of the Holocaust, communists, socialists, trade unionists, and political opponents of the Nazi regime who were persecuted and murdered, I invite David Joyce of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and Ciarán Cuff, MEP, to light their candles. We will always remember. In memory of the Christian victims of all denominations who were persecuted and murdered by the Nazis, I invite Susan Hood, Church of Ireland librarian and archivist, and Phil Matthews, healthcare chaplain at Our Lady's Hospice, to light their candles. We will always remember. 6 candles are dedicated to the memory of the 6 million Jewish people, including 1.5 million children, who were annihilated in the Holocaust. Jews were murdered in concentration camps, labor camps, and death camps. Jews perished in the ghettos. Jews died of starvation and disease. Jews were shot in the forests and in their villages, and Jews were murdered in the streets and in their homes. Those lighting candles in memory of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust are children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, second, third, and fourth generation survivors. All of them lost countless members of their families in the Holocaust. Tony Collis, whose grandfather, Zoltan Zinn, and great-aunt Edith survived Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, but whose other family members perished in the Holocaust. Olivia Wieder, whose great-grandmother's sister, mother, husband, and son were all killed in the Holocaust. Their names were Liesel, Josephine, Otto, and Tommy, from the town of Brno, just outside Prague. Lana Kaminska, whose grandfather, Jan Kamiński, escaped the massacre in his native village of Bilgoraj in Poland, where his parents, Mindla and Shulim, his two sisters, Hanna and Rivka, and his baby brother, were all murdered. Yoram Tokar, whose great-uncle and aunt, David and Jeanette Gelassen, Paul and Sarah Talma, and other family members perished in the Holocaust. Kyla Hertz, whose grandfather, Wolf Hertz, escaped the massacre in the Bronica forest, and whose great-grandparents, Lenka and Avro Muskovich, survived Auschwitz, but whose other family members perished in the Holocaust. Joe Katz, whose mother Frida survived Auschwitz, but whose many family members perished in the Holocaust. We will always remember. As our ceremony draws to a close, Rabbi Yoni Wieder will read the memorial prayer, which will then be sung in Hebrew by Carl Nelken of the Irish Jewish community. Please stand.
God of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest and sheltering on the wings of your divine presence among the holy and pure, who shine like the brightness of the firmament. For the souls of all the holy and pure and the innocent who were killed, murdered, slaughtered, burned, drowned, and strangled at the hands of the Nazi oppressors in Auschwitz, Warsaw, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Chelmno, Majdanek, Sobibor, Treblinka, and other extermination camps in Europe. we pray for those souls. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. And so may the Master of Mercy shelter them for eternity with the cover of his wings. And may he bind their souls in the bonds of eternal life. May the Lord be their inheritance. May they repose in peace upon their heavenly resting places. And let us say, Amen.
מולי רחמים, שוכן ממרמים, המסה מנוחו נכונה, על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהרים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, אש נשמות אחינו בני ישראל, הקדושים הטהורים, שנפלו בידי הרוצחים, ונשמח דמם באושוויץ, מיידנק, טרבלינקה, ובשאר מחנות השמד באירופה, שנהרגו, שנשחטו, ושנשרפו, ושנטבעו, ושנחנקו, על קידוש השם. בעבור שכל הקול הקדוש הזה, מתפללים ביד אזכורות נשמתם. בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתם, לא כן בנו רחמים, יסירי מסס כנופך ליעלמים, וצרור בשרור החיים את נשמתם, אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו על משכבותם בשלום, ונאמר אמן.
Professor Thomas O'Dowd will give his closing remarks.
It was the survivors themselves who first acknowledged their responsibility for passing on knowledge of the Holocaust and keeping its memory alive. For this reason, it is essential to teach about the Shoah, whether there are Jews in your respective countries or not, whether there are many or few or none left. The Shoah should never be diluted, never denied, distorted, or trivialized. Our generation and the generation or two after us will be the last that will be able to say that we stood and shook the hand of some of those who survived. Go home from this place and tell your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren that today you looked into the eyes that witnessed the most cataclysmic events ever unleashed by mankind upon mankind. Tell them that you met people who will still be remembered and still talked about and still wept over 1,000 years from now. The Holocaust happened, and it can happen again. And every one of us has a solemn duty to ensure that nothing like it ever occurs again.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us in this evening of solemn commemoration. The President of Ireland is leaving immediately after the ceremony. Thank you.